At exactly 6:30 a.m., like she had done every morning for the past 15 years, Dorothy Williams stepped out of her modest two-bedroom house on Maple Street. At 90 years old, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate the world. Before we jump back in, tell me where are you watching this video from below, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's episode is extra special. Despite failing eyesight and arthritic joints, Dorothy's silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore her favorite blue cardigan over a simple white blouse. Her hands, though weathered by age and marked with liver spots, still held steady as she gripped her wooden walking cane. This wasn't just any cane. It was carved from oak and had been a gift from her late husband, Frank, before he passed away 12 years ago. The routine was sacred to Dorothy. Every morning, she would walk the 6 blocks to Murphy's Corner store to buy her daily newspaper and a small container of milk. The walk took her nearly 30 minutes now, but she refused to give up this independence. It was one of the few things that made her feel connected to the world beyond her quiet house. Murphy's Corner store had been owned by the same family for 3 generations. Tom Murphy, the current owner, was a kind man in his 50s who always greeted Dorothy with a warm smile and genuine concern for her well-being. He had known her since he was a boy, when she used to bring homemade cookies to the store during the holidays. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams," Tom would say, already reaching for her usual items. "How are you feeling today?" Dorothy would nod politely, pay for her items, and begin the slow journey back home. She preferred to walk along Pine Street, which had less traffic and a beautiful view of the old courthouse with its classic brick architecture. The morning walk was her meditation, her connection to the community she had called home for over 60 years. What most people in Pine Ridge didn't know about Dorothy Williams was that she was a war veteran. She had served as a nurse in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, caring for wounded soldiers in field hospitals just miles from active combat zones. She had seen things that would haunt most people for life, but Dorothy had channeled her experiences into a quiet strength that carried her through decades of civilian life. Dorothy rarely spoke about her military service. When Frank was alive, he would sometimes find her sitting in their backyard at night, staring at the stars, lost in memories she couldn't quite shake. The boys, she would whisper to him, I can still hear them calling for their mothers. Frank, who had served in World War II, understood. He would simply sit beside her, holding her hand in comfortable silence. After Frank's death, Dorothy had become even more private about her past. She lived on her military pension and Social Security, managing her finances carefully in a small notebook she kept in her kitchen drawer. The house was paid off, but medical bills and daily expenses required careful budgeting. She grew vegetables in her small backyard garden and preserved them for winter, skills she had learned from her mother during the Great Depression. Dorothy's daily routine was disrupted on a Tuesday morning in late September as she made her way back from Murphy's Corner store, carefully navigating the cracked sidewalk with her cane. She heard the rumble of motorcycle engines behind her. The sound grew louder and more aggressive, and she instinctively moved closer to the edge of the sidewalk to give the riders plenty of room to pass. Instead of passing, the motorcycles slowed down, keeping pace with her labored steps. Dorothy glanced over her shoulder and saw 3 men on large, loud motorcycles. They were wearing leather jackets with patches she couldn't quite make out, and bandanas covered the lower halves of their faces. The lead rider, a heavy-set man with graying hair and multiple tattoos covering his arms, was staring directly at her. "Hey, old lady," the lead rider called out, his voice carrying over the rumble of the engines. "You're walking mighty slow there. Maybe you should stay home where you belong." Dorothy kept walking, pretending not to hear them. She had learned long ago that the best response to bullies was often no response at all, but her heart was beating faster and she gripped her cane more tightly. The second rider, younger with a scraggly beard and wearing a torn denim vest, laughed loudly. "Look at her trying to ignore us, Jake. Maybe she's deaf as well as old." The third rider, who appeared to be the youngest of the group, revved his engine aggressively. "Come on, Grandma, pick up the pace. Some of us have places to be." Dorothy continued walking, but she could feel her hands beginning to shake. These men were clearly trying to intimidate her, and despite her military training and life experience, she felt vulnerable and alone on the empty street. The harassment continued for 2 more blocks. The bikers would speed up and slow down, making comments about her age, her appearance, and her right to be walking on their street. Dorothy's breath became more labored, not just from the physical exertion of walking, but from the stress of being targeted. "You know what, old-timer?" Jake, the lead rider, said as they approached the corner near Dorothy's house. "Maybe you should just stay inside from now on. The streets aren't safe for someone like you." With that, the 3 motorcycles roared away, leaving Dorothy standing alone on the sidewalk, her hands trembling and her heart pounding. She stood there for several minutes, trying to compose herself before walking the final block to her house. Inside her home, Dorothy sat in her favorite armchair, still holding her newspaper and milk. She couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. In all her years living in Pine Ridge, she had never experienced anything like this. The town had always been peaceful, friendly, and safe. These men were clearly not from the area, and their behavior was completely unprovoked. That afternoon, Dorothy called her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly Korean woman who lived next door. Mrs. Chen had become Dorothy's closest friend after Frank's death, and they often shared tea and conversation in the afternoons. "They were trying to scare me," Dorothy explained, her voice still shaky. "I don't understand why anyone would want to frighten an old woman just trying to get her groceries." Mrs. Chen shook her head sympathetically. "Some people have no respect for elders. In my country, such behavior would be unthinkable. Have you considered calling the police?" Dorothy sighed. "What would I tell them? That some men on motorcycles were rude to me. They didn't actually hurt me or threaten me directly. They were just ... mean." The next morning, Dorothy debated whether to make her usual walk to Murphy's Corner store. The encounter had shaken her confidence, and she found herself looking out her window nervously before stepping outside. But Dorothy Williams had not survived a war and 90 years of life by giving in to fear. She put on her blue cardigan, picked up her wooden cane, and stepped out into the morning air. The walk to Murphy's was uneventful, and she began to hope that yesterday's incident had been a one-time occurrence. Tom Murphy noticed that she seemed more nervous than usual. "Everything all right, Mrs. Williams? You seem a bit on edge today." Dorothy hesitated, then decided to tell him about the motorcycle riders. Tom's expression grew serious as she described the encounter. "Mrs. Williams, those men sound like they might be part of a motorcycle gang that's been causing trouble in the county. Sheriff Martinez mentioned them at the town council meeting last week. They've been harassing people and causing disturbances at several businesses." Tom leaned closer, his voice concerned. "Listen, if you see them again, you call me immediately. And maybe you should consider calling the sheriff's office to report what happened yesterday." Dorothy nodded, though she still felt uncertain about involving law enforcement. She had always been independent and self-reliant, and the idea of asking for help felt uncomfortable. The walk home started peacefully. Dorothy made it 3 blocks before she heard the familiar rumble of motorcycle engines. Her heart sank as she realized it was the same 3 men from the day before. This time, they were more aggressive. Jake, the lead rider, pulled his motorcycle directly in front of Dorothy, blocking her path on the sidewalk. The other 2 riders positioned themselves on either side of her, effectively trapping her. Well, Jake said, removing his helmet to reveal a face marked by years of hard living. Look who decided to venture out again, despite our friendly advice. Dorothy stood as straight as she could, drawing on reserves of courage she had developed during her years of military service. Please let me pass. I'm just trying to get home. The younger rider laughed. Oh, she's got some fight in her, doesn't she? Maybe we need to be more clear about our message. Jake got off his motorcycle and stepped closer to Dorothy. Large man, well over 6 feet tall, and his presence was intimidating. Listen, old lady, this is our town now. We don't want to see you shuffling around these streets anymore. It's not safe for someone your age. Dorothy's military training kicked in. She recognized the behavior of bullies and knew that showing fear would only encourage them. This is a public sidewalk, and I have every right to be here. I've been walking these streets longer than you've been alive. The comment seemed to anger Jake. Longer than I've been alive. You think that gives you some kind of special privileges? Let me tell you something, Grandma. Age doesn't earn you respect around here. It just makes you a target. The scraggly bearded rider, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Maybe we should teach her some manners, Jake. Show her what happens to old folks who don't know when to keep their mouths shut. Dorothy's grip tightened on her walking cane. She had faced enemy fire in Korea, had held dying soldiers in her arms, had lived through the Great Depression and 2 world wars. These men might be younger and stronger, but she was not going to be intimidated. I'm not looking for trouble, Dorothy said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I just want to go home. Jake stepped even closer, and Dorothy could smell alcohol on his breath, despite it being only 10 a.m. Trouble. Lady, you are trouble. Old people like you are what's wrong with this country. You take up space, use up resources, and slow everyone else down. The third rider, who had remained on his motorcycle, suddenly looked uncomfortable. Come on, Jake. Maybe we should just leave her alone. She's just an old lady. Jake whirled around. Don't go soft on me now, Tommy. We've got a reputation to maintain. Dorothy used the momentary distraction to step around Jake and continue walking. But he quickly moved to block her path again. Where do you think you're going? We're not finished talking yet. That's when Dorothy made a decision that would change everything. She reached into her small purse and pulled out her cell phone. A simple device that Mrs. Chen had insisted she carry for emergencies. I'm calling the police, Dorothy announced, her finger hovering over the keypad. Jake laughed. Go ahead, old lady. Call the cops. By the time they get here, we'll be long gone, and you'll still be just another scared old woman who can't take care of herself. Dorothy looked at the 3 men surrounding her, and for the first time since the harassment began, she smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile, but rather the kind of smile that comes from knowing something that others don't. I'm not calling the police, Dorothy said quietly, her voice carrying a strength that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her. I'm calling someone else. She scrolled through her limited contact list and found the number she was looking. 4. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hello? Hello. This is Dorothy Williams, she said, her voice clear and strong. I need to speak with General Harrison, please. Tell him it's Sergeant Williams from the 8063rd MASH Unit, Korea. The 3 bikers looked at each other uncertainly. Confident expression began to waver as he heard Dorothy's words. Ma'am, please hold, came the voice on the other end of the line. I'll get the general immediately. Dorothy stood there, phone to her ear, looking directly at Jake. The military bearing that had been hidden beneath decades of civilian life was suddenly visible in her posture, her expression, and the way she held herself. Within seconds, another voice came on the line. Sergeant Williams. Dorothy. Is that really you? Yes. General Harrison, it's me. I'm sorry to bother you, but I find myself in a situation that requires some assistance." "Dorothy, you could never be a bother. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" Dorothy's eyes never left Jake's face as she spoke. "I'm currently being harassed by 3 men on motorcycles. They've blocked my path, threatened me, and seem to think that my age makes me an easy target." General Harrison's voice became sharp and businesslike. "Give me your exact location." "I'm on Pine Street, about 2 blocks from Maple Street, in Pine Ridge, Montana. Are you in immediate physical danger?" Dorothy looked at the 3 bikers, who were now listening intently to her conversation. "I don't believe so. But these men seem determined to continue their harassment. Dorothy, I want you to put the phone on speaker and let me talk to them." Dorothy switched to speaker mode and held the phone up. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet General Robert Harrison, United States Army." The general's voice boomed through the phone speaker. "This is General Harrison. I'm speaking to the individuals who are currently harassing Sergeant Dorothy Williams. Are you listening?" Jake's face had gone pale. Who is this?" "I'm a United States Army general, and the woman you're threatening is a decorated veteran who served our country with distinction in Korea. She saved the lives of hundreds of American soldiers, and she has earned the respect and protection of every person in this nation." The younger rider, Tommy, had gotten off his motorcycle and was backing away. "Jake, man, we need to get out of here. This is getting serious." But General Harrison wasn't finished. "I'm currently contacting the local sheriff's office, the state police, and the FBI field office in Billings. If any harm comes to Sergeant Williams, if she's harassed, threatened, or intimidated in any way, I will personally ensure that the full weight of federal law enforcement comes down on whoever is responsible." Dorothy watched as the 3 men exchanged nervous glances. Jake's earlier confidence had completely evaporated. "Furthermore," the general continued, "I'm alerting the Veterans Administration, the American Legion, and the VFW posts throughout Montana. Sergeant Williams is now under the protection of every veteran in this state. I suggest you gentlemen find somewhere else to be." Jake was now visibly shaking. We didn't know she was a veteran. We were just... You were just... What?" General Harrison's voice was ice cold, threatening a 90-year-old woman, intimidating someone who risked her life for your freedom. Get out of there before I decide to make this a federal case." The 3 bikers quickly mounted their motorcycles. Jake looked at Dorothy one last time, his expression a mixture of fear and shame. "Ma'am, we're sorry. We didn't mean any real harm." Dorothy switched off the speaker and brought the phone back to her ear. "They're leaving, General." "Good. Dorothy, I'm still sending local law enforcement to check on you. And I'm arranging for some friends of mine in the area to keep an eye on you. You should never have to deal with something like this alone." Dorothy felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you, General. I didn't know if you'd even remember me." "Remember you?" "Dorothy, you saved my life in Korea. You stayed with me for 3 days when I was wounded, made sure I got the care I needed. I've never forgotten that, and I never will." As the motorcycle engines faded into the distance, Dorothy stood alone on the sidewalk, still holding her phone. For the first time in years, she felt the pride and strength that came from being part of something bigger than herself, the brotherhood and sisterhood of those who had served their country. But Dorothy Williams had no idea that her simple phone call had set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just her life, but the entire town of Pine Ridge. The story of the 90-year-old veteran who had stood up to bullies was about to become something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Within 20 minutes of Dorothy's phone call, Pine Ridge transformed into something resembling a military operation. Sheriff Martinez arrived first, his patrol car followed by 2 state police vehicles. But what happened next surprised even Dorothy. A convoy of motorcycles began arriving from all directions. These weren't the threatening machines that had terrorized Dorothy earlier, but carefully maintained bikes ridden by men and women wearing American Legion patches, VFW insignia, and Marine Corps emblems. Word had spread through the veteran community faster than wildfire. The first to reach Dorothy was Master Sergeant retired Mike Rodriguez, a 65-year-old Vietnam veteran who lived 30 miles away in Billings. He had dropped everything when he received the call from his VFW post commander. "Ma'am," he said, removing his helmet and approaching Dorothy with obvious respect. "I'm Mike Rodriguez, 1st Cavalry Division. We're here to make sure you're safe." Dorothy looked around in amazement as more veterans continued to arrive. There were men and women from every branch of service, representing conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan. Some rode motorcycles, others came in pickup trucks and cars. All had come because word had spread that one of their own needed help. Sheriff Martinez, a former Army MP himself, coordinated with the growing group of veterans. "Mrs. Williams, I need to take a statement about what happened here. But first, I want you to know that we've identified the 3 men who harassed you." Dorothy nodded, still overwhelmed by the response her phone call had generated. "How did you find them so quickly?" "Well," Sheriff Martinez smiled, "it turns out that when General Harrison contacts the FBI, things happen fast. We had their license plates within minutes, and they were pulled over about 20 miles south of here, currently being questioned about harassment, intimidation, and possible hate crimes against an elderly person." Tom Murphy from the corner store had also arrived, carrying a folding chair for Dorothy. "Mrs. Williams, I had no idea about your military service. Why didn't you ever mention it?" Dorothy sat down gratefully, her legs still shaking from the morning's events. "It was a long time ago, Tom. I've always believed that service speaks for itself, not words." Master Sergeant Rodriguez knelt beside Dorothy's chair. "Ma'am, with your permission, I'd like to share your story with the local media. What happened to you today was wrong, but your response, that showed real courage. People need to hear about veterans like you." Dorothy hesitated. "I don't want to make a big fuss. I just wanted those men to leave me alone." An older woman approached the group. She wore a Navy veteran's cap and walked with a slight limp. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Captain Retired Sarah Mitchell. Navy Nurse Chorus, I served in Desert Storm. What you did today wasn't just standing up for yourself. You stood up for all of us." Captain Mitchell sat on a nearby bench. "You see, there are too many people who think veterans are just young men coming back from recent wars. They don't realize that heroes come in all ages and that some of our bravest served decades ago. Your story reminds everyone that veterans deserve respect regardless of their age." Sheriff Martinez finished taking Dorothy's statement and approached the growing group. "Mrs. Williams, I have some updates. The 3 men who harassed you have been charged with elder abuse, harassment, and intimidation. It turns out they've been causing problems throughout the county for weeks." He paused, checking his notes. "The leader, Jake Morrison, has a long criminal record, including assault and drug charges. The other 2 are younger and seem to have been following his lead. They're all being held pending bail hearings." Dorothy felt a mixture of relief and sadness. "I don't take pleasure in seeing anyone arrested, Sheriff. I just wanted to feel safe walking to the store." "And you will," said a new voice. Everyone turned to see a tall man in his 50s approaching. He wore a crisp military uniform with multiple ribbons and insignia that clearly marked him as active duty. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Colonel James Patterson, stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base. General Harrison asked me to come personally to ensure your safety and to thank you for your service." Dorothy tried to stand, but Colonel Patterson gently motioned for her to remain seated. "Ma'am, the pleasure is mine." General Harrison filled me in on your service record. 3 years as a combat nurse in Korea. Bronze Star for Valor. Saved over 200 wounded soldiers. You're a genuine American hero. The crowd of veterans had grown to over 50 people. Dorothy looked around at their faces, men and women of all ages, representing decades of military service and sacrifice. She felt emotions she hadn't experienced since Frank's funeral. "I don't feel like a hero," Dorothy said quietly. "I just did my job." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," replied an elderly man wearing a Korean War veteran cap. "I'm Bill Henderson, 2nd Infantry Division. I was wounded at Heartbreak Ridge in 1952. A nurse saved my life in a MASH unit, and I've wondered for 70 years if I'd ever get to thank her." Bill approached Dorothy with tears in his eyes. "Ma'am, I don't know if you were the nurse who saved me, but you saved somebody's son, somebody's husband, somebody's father, and that makes you family to all of us." Colonel Patterson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Williams, General Harrison has authorized me to present you with something that's long overdue." He opened a military case and removed a folded flag and a certificate. "This is an official commendation from the Department of Defense, recognizing your distinguished service in Korea and your continued example of courage and dignity. The flag has flown over the Pentagon in your honor." Dorothy accepted the flag with trembling hands. She had never expected recognition for her military service, and certainly not under these circumstances. Tom Murphy stepped forward. "Mrs. Williams, I have an announcement. From now on, Murphy's Corner Store is providing free home delivery for any veteran in Pine Ridge, and your daily newspaper and milk, they're on the house for life." Sheriff Martinez added, "We're also establishing a daily check-in program for elderly veterans in the county. No one should ever feel unsafe or alone." Captain Mitchell stood up. "And the local VFW post is starting a veterans breakfast every Saturday morning. Mrs. Williams, we'd be honored if you'd be our guest speaker at the first one." Dorothy looked around at all the faces surrounding her fellow veterans, community members, law enforcement officers, all united by respect for service and determination to protect those who had protected others. "I'm overwhelmed," Dorothy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This morning I was just an old woman being picked on by bullies. Now I feel like I'm part of something important again." Master Sergeant Rodriguez smiled. "Ma'am, you were always part of something important. Sometimes it just takes the right moment for people to remember." Over the next few hours, the impromptu gathering evolved into something resembling a military reunion. Veterans shared stories, compared service records, and formed connections that crossed generational lines. Dorothy found herself at the center of it all, no longer feeling invisible or forgotten. Mrs. Chen arrived with a thermos of tea and homemade cookies. "Dorothy, I'm so proud of you. You showed those bullies that they picked on the wrong person." "I just made a phone call," Dorothy protested. "Made the right phone call," corrected Colonel Patterson. "And you reminded all of us why we serve. To protect people like you who've already given so much." As the afternoon wore on, local news crews arrived. Dorothy initially wanted to avoid the cameras, but Captain Mitchell convinced her that her story needed to be told. "Mrs. Williams," said the reporter from the local television station, "can you tell us about your decision to call General Harrison instead of the police?" Dorothy thought for a moment. "When you've served in the military, you learn that you're never really alone. There's always someone who has your back, even decades later. I knew that if I reached out to my military family, they would be there for me." What would you say to other elderly people who might be facing similar harassment? I'd say don't be afraid to ask for help, whether it's from family, friends, neighbors, or fellow veterans. There are always people who care, and don't let anyone make you feel like your age makes you less valuable. We've earned our place in this world. The reporter turned to Master Sergeant Rodriguez. How did word spread so quickly among the veteran community? Veterans take care of veterans, Rodriguez replied simply. When one of us is in trouble, we all respond. It doesn't matter what war you fought in, what branch you served in, or how long ago it was. Service creates a bond that never breaks. Sheriff Martinez provided an update on the three bikers. Jake Morrison and his associates have been denied bail due to their criminal histories and the serious nature of the charges. They'll likely face significant jail time, especially given that this was classified as a hate crime against an elderly veteran. As evening approached, the crowd of supporters began to disperse. But not before each veteran personally thanked Dorothy and provided her with contact information. Many promised to visit regularly, creating an informal support network that would ensure she never felt alone again. Colonel Patterson made one final announcement. Mrs. Williams, General Harrison has invited you to be the guest of honor at the Veterans Day ceremony at the Pentagon this November. All expenses paid, of course. Dorothy was speechless. The idea of traveling to Washington, D.C. and being honored at the Pentagon seemed impossible for someone who struggled to walk 6 blocks to the corner store. I don't know if I'm up for that kind of travel, Dorothy said hesitantly. Ma'am, Colonel Patterson smiled. You'll be traveling on a military transport with a full medical team if needed. General Harrison insisted that nothing be too good for the nurse who saved his life in Korea. 3 months later, Dorothy Williams stood at the podium in the Pentagon's main auditorium, looking out at an audience of active duty service members, veterans, and government officials. She wore a new blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her pick out, and her bronze star was pinned proudly to her lapel. 70 years ago, Dorothy began, her voice strong and clear. I was a young nurse in Korea. I thought I was just doing my job, helping wounded soldiers and trying to save lives. I never imagined that decades later those same soldiers would be there to save me. The audience listened in complete silence as Dorothy recounted her experience with the bikers and the response from the veteran community. I learned something important that day in Pine Ridge. I learned that service never really ends. Once you're part of the military family, you're always part of it. And I learned that courage doesn't have an expiration date. Whether you're 20 or 90, you can still stand up for what's right. Dorothy paused, looking at General Harrison in the front row. He was now 89 years old himself, but he had insisted on attending to personally thank the nurse who had saved his life. Today, I want to thank all the veterans who came to my aid. That day, you reminded me that I'm not just an old woman shuffling to the corner store. I'm a veteran, and that means something. It means I'm part of a family that spans generations, a family that never abandons its own. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. Dorothy looked out at the faces in the audience and saw what she had seen that day in Pine Ridge: respect, admiration, and the unbreakable bond of military service. After the ceremony, General Harrison approached Dorothy with the aid of his own walking cane. Sergeant Williams, I have something for you. He handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a medallion inscribed with the words Korean War Veteran and Hero. But what touched Dorothy most was the note inside, from the soldiers you saved. To the nurse who saved us all. 6 months after her Pentagon visit, Dorothy Williams still made her daily walk to Murphy's Corner store. But now she was rarely alone. Members of the local VFW post took turns walking with her, and Tom Murphy had installed a comfortable bench outside his store, where veterans gathered each morning to share coffee and conversation. The 3 bikers who had harassed Dorothy were sentenced to significant jail time. Jake Morrison received 5 years in federal prison, while his 2 associates received shorter sentences and were ordered to perform community service at the local veterans' home. Dorothy's story had inspired similar responses across the country. Veterans organizations established elder care programs, and Dorothy Williams Day became an annual event in Pine Ridge. celebrating elderly veterans and raising awareness about elder abuse. Mrs. Chen often joined Dorothy for her morning walks, and they would talk about how much their lives had changed since that frightening Tuesday morning. "I still can't believe one phone call led to all this," Dorothy mused as they sat on the bench outside Murphy's store. "It wasn't just a phone call," Mrs. Chen replied. "It was 70 years of courage and service finally getting the recognition it deserved." Dorothy smiled, adjusting the small American flag pin that Colonel Patterson had given her. "Frank would have been proud." "Frank is proud," Mrs. Chen corrected. "And so are all the soldiers whose lives you saved in Korea. Your courage that day didn't just protect you, it protected every elderly person who might face bullies in the future." As they sat in the morning sunshine, watching veterans and community members go about their daily business, Dorothy reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. She was no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. She was Dorothy Williams, Korean War veteran, Bronze Star recipient, and hero to an entire community. The bullies had thought they were targeting a helpless old woman. Instead, they had awakened a sleeping giant, not just Dorothy herself, but the entire network of veterans who would always be ready to protect one of their own. Dorothy's story became a reminder that courage has no expiration date, that service creates bonds that last a lifetime, and that sometimes the most unexpected phone call can change everything. In standing up to her tormentors, Dorothy Williams had not only reclaimed her own dignity, but had inspired a movement that would protect vulnerable veterans across the nation. The 90-year-old veteran who had been bullied by bikers had made a phone call that echoed far beyond the quiet streets of Pine Ridge, Montana. It was a call that reminded everyone that heroes come in all ages and that true courage never grows old.
Hit subscribe and keep watching. More stories waiting for you. Tap the video on screen. Just click and enjoy.